for you, or I will, I'll take the crime, I'll take the bullet for you, that kind of love. It's very rare that we see that, isn't it? Yeah. So he's calling us in 10, he's calling us ungodly in 6, 8, we're sinners, now we're enemies. So when he's talking about being enemies with God, it's kind of an interesting relationship, isn't it? What would it mean? I mean, to be a sinner is a description. We're all sinners, and we all sin. We sin every day. We ask for forgiveness. Ungodly, that's a little harsher, isn't it? Because do you consider yourself to be ungodly? No. Outside of Christ, yeah. But an enemy with God, which one's the worst one as a descriptor? Oh, yeah, that's a harsh one, isn't it? Paul uses all three of those to describe their state outside of Christ. So, and then he says, but we were reconciled. Now, what does it mean to be reconciled? Remember, it's that one-time event. That Christ's death reconciles it. Means that, okay, we'll go back to the justification. I'm acquitted, but now I can stand in God's presence. I have the ability to stand in God's presence because what Jesus did for me. Outside of that, I can't do that, and I'm an enemy with God. So, and another hard thing for people in society to accept, isn't it? Well, baptism's just an act. You guys you put too much emphasis on baptism. Wow. One that we've allowed to slip, haven't we? But what does Paul say here? Outside of Christ, you are an enemy with God. And therefore, you're storing up that wrath. So, and I have asked the question before, how many people want to line up for God's wrath? No. But enough that you're willing to do something about it? You don't want to be in that situation enough that you'll do something about it and believe in the word and not let society influence you? It's a hard challenge for us in today's world, isn't it? It's really difficult. But we can't give up. I'll say that. We can't give up. So he makes a comparison that, Christ died for us while we were sinners. And he said, but much more, because of his death, you can now live. You can live that life of righteousness. You can live right before God. You can be in God's presence, and it's okay. Whereas when you're an enemy with God, you can't be in that condition. So it goes directly back. I don't care how you cut it, how you discuss it. If they haven't taken Christ on in baptism, then they can't be in that justified state, can they? It's not just calling on God. It's not just living a good life. It's not, I'm a good person. That's not what the Bible teaches. And so trying to convict people of that is a challenge for us, isn't it? A real challenge. So what, in essence, is Paul saying here? Try to summarize that. What do you think he's trying to say? Christ died, and then much more. We're going to live. I'm doing a horrible job of asking questions, so I'm just going to do it. Basically, and I loved this from a commentator, and I will give credit to Brent Kirchfield for stealing his words because I think it describes it very well. God has already done the most difficult thing, which is sending his son Jesus to the earth to die. He's already done the most difficult thing, and he did it while we were sinners, while we were still enemies with God. He did that. So how much easier, and this is the question Paul's asking, how much easier is it for him then to do the easier thing, which is to save us because we're justified? He's already done the hard thing, sin in Jesus. The other part is easy as long as we play the part that we're supposed to play. Does that make sense? Help describe what he's talking about? I thought it was a good description. And then he ends it in verse 11 by saying, and in addition to that, we exult in God because of what he's done. What does it mean to exult? Hey, that's pretty cool. Say that again. Rejoice. Yeah. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. This goes beyond that. This is celebration rejoicing. This is exulting in the sense that it is it's an act that was committed that causes us to leap for joy. Have you ever gotten a message where you've been waiting for a good answer and you just kind of came out of yourself? because the answer you were looking for, whether it was through prayer or whatever came, I see people smiling like, yeah, I remember those things. That's what it's talking about. It's that kind of celebration that we have because of what Christ has done for us. It's not like, oh, wow, that's cool. That's pretty neat. No, it's like I'm coming out of myself, exulting in myself, or exulting in God because of what he's done. I saw a hand go up. Maybe I didn't. Yes. Jubilation. Okay. Another, yeah. So, all right. We're going to spend the last few times. We're going to go back and look at verses 6 and 7. Pick those up and in the conversation. We'll even if we end early, we're going to finish with 6 and 7 because 12 to 21 can be a little bit difficult to understand. And I want to spend the appropriate amount of time talking about what Paul is saying there in this next section of chapter 5. So back to verses 6 and 7. That's how we let it off. For while we were still helpless, we've heard that term a couple of times, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. Okay, so we're called ungodly. For one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man someone would dare even to die. So what are other translations use? Mine has helpless. What do other translations have? Powerless. Weak. Okay, weak. Yeah, there's an association with weak in the Greek term that's used. Anybody have anything else? Okay, it's the Greek term is without strength. Helpless, without strength. And what came to my mind is, have you ever had one of those dreams where you need to run and your body won't run? Everybody's laughing, so I'm not the weirdo in here. Everybody's had that dream. My body won't move. You're helpless, aren't you? That's like, oh my goodness. That's what he's talking. Without strength, you have no way to defend yourself. In fact, one commentator put it into, and they use this example a lot, but I thought it was funny. Now, this probably hasn't happened to you. I know of people that it's happened to. I've never, ever done it. But you're driving along and you go by and you see the policeman with the radar gun on you. And it's a certain miles per hour and you're not going those miles per hour. And what do? Lights go on and you're just like, he'll have this ticket written before I get there. You know, that's feeling of helplessness, right? You've committed the crime. There's nothing you can do about it. You're just going to wait for the consequences. That's the kind of helplessness that he's talking about. But he's not talking about it from a physical standpoint. He's talking about it from a spiritual standpoint. And I think sometimes, especially as we get further into chapter 5, people make an association that Paul's talking about physical death in some of his passages, and that's not what he's talking about. He hasn't been talking about that from the beginning, has he? Everything has been in the spiritual realm. So it's a spiritual weakness. We don't have the ability from a spiritual standpoint to stand before God. We're weakless. We're helpless. We're weak. We're without strength. That's what he's talking about. And until this act occurred with Jesus that justifies us, that's the state we're in. And because of that, ungodly, sinners, and enemies with God. So it kind of throws all those categories into the same one. So in verse 7, he's going to go on and he's going to say that he's going to contrast that to the conversation we had in verse 8. And let's be honest, it's talking about people that you would die for. Can you think of somebody, and be honest, can you think of somebody that you would die for? Okay, how big is that list? Are the hard-to-love people on that list? Getting a little bit personal here, but are the hard-to-love people on that list? No. Reminds me of a story. We were blessed with the opportunity to go to Tanzania, and my nephew and his wife were doing we'll call it a marriage seminar class with some of the tribes. We went into one of the villages, and he was talking to them about how you treat your wife and how you treat children and the interaction and how a Christian marriage should be in the interactions. And, you know, he started off with the example. He says, hit yourself. And they're going, why? He goes, because in that society, if a woman's not in line, it's okay to hit them. Straighten them out. That's count, yeah. There's some American women that would not tolerate or be able to survive over there. I'm just telling you. It's very different. And they were going like, well, I wouldn't hit myself. But he says, well, think of it in terms of if you do that to your wife. Does that mean, do you love her? Well, yeah, I love her, but then why are you hitting her? And, they were kind of thinking about it. And he goes, do you love anyone well enough that you would die for them? And they're all kind of looking around. And so I just said, hey, can I participate? Sure. And I raised my hand. I said, I would die for my wife. Without missing a beat, one of the tribal guys said, yeah, but you're old. Thank you very much. And so I thought, there's a mentality about that, isn't there? In their culture, that's the way women are treated. They would not die for even their wife, because what they're thinking is, well, I can get another wife. They ask him about the kids. If a lion came into the village and, was to attack one of the kids, he was like, yeah, I'd feel bad about it for a while, but I can go make another one. And I understand that it's foreign thinking to you. That's why I said American women would struggle over there. But it's what's been ingrained. It's what they believe. And so imagine the challenges of trying to get them to see the Christian relationship that they're supposed to have that's based on that love. So, having that love for one another, having that love for somebody that you will die for, we can all probably put somebody on that list, right? Some of you, maybe 2, maybe 3 people on that list or more. But it's not going to be a very long list, is it? And then we talked about the hard-to-love person. You're on your own, You messed up enough. You're on your own.
Yeah, I think it depends on that, because I like to think that I would put my life on the line for any child.
Yeah, for any
child.
Oh, for any child. Okay. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, there are people that I've seen that kind of have that heart. Now, the question is, they always say, if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty, is, yeah, but when the time comes, how will you react? Will that characteristic pop out? Remember, we talked about you'll see the true individual during the most difficult times of their life. So, admirable, and I'm not downplaying it, Jerry, it's an admirable thing to say, but when the time comes, would you really do it? Because it's a hard thing, isn't it? It's really a hard thing. And then we get into that list of people that we don't really care about. So we got the ones we love, we'll die for. However, there's no judgment on how long your list is, whether it's 1 or more. The hard-to-love people, we would hope that we'd die for a child, a little bigger category, sacrifice our life to save a child's life. But probably not so much for the person we don't know, right? And that's the point that Paul is trying to make here. So when you look at that, here's what Christ did, and I kind of rephrased it this way. Christ died for his apostles. He died for the apostle that he loved. Remember, he had an apostle that he had a special affinity for. He died for his disciples, and he died for those that believed in him early on and were baptized into his name. And he died for the money changers in the temple. And he died for the Jews that sent him to Pilate and ultimately to his crucifixion. He died for the Roman soldiers that mistreated him. He even died for the Roman soldier that stuck the spear in his side. Yeah. So what Paul is trying to get us to see is that's the level of love that Christ showed. And he's trying to say, you're going to have difficulty finding a person that shows that kind of love. It just doesn't happen. And so he's challenging them to think deeper on how great the love of Christ and God is and how he demonstrated that love by Christ's sacrifice. That's the point he's trying to make. And I think oftentimes when we read this, we've heard it so much, we don't allow it to sink in deeper, do we? It's more of a superficial, yeah, Christ died for while we were yet sinners. We've heard it so much, it's kind of I can rattle off that scripture. Think about it deeply. Oh, just doing well, you bought the farm there in Missouri, so thanks for participating. Yeah. Well, let me, it's an obvious point, but the point that I'm trying to make is that Paul isn't trying to make it a superficial point to them. He's saying, think deeply about that. The kind of love that was shown and the kind of love that you're not going to find in a human being. You're just not going to find that kind of person. But Christ came along, that perfect sacrifice, and he did that for us. And that's how God shows his love for us, how he demonstrates his love for us to the world. Okay, we're going to end there. Questions or comments before we close? We'll give you an extra 5 minutes to go and
I think
fellowship.
As your family grows, sometimes your list grows.
Yep.
When
Mm-hmm.
when you're just a married couple, you have just your wife.
Mm-hmm.
When you have children, then you add your children. When your children have children, you add them.
Yeah, grandchildren. Yeah. Well, except for this one over here. It's always a problem. That one's hard to love over there. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I know. My point is, it's bumping up that level of love closer to that agape kind of love as opposed to that I'll pick and choose love. Melissa? Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the flesh, our fleshly desires and the way we think through the flesh is what puts it at odds with God, right? That's why in the class, it's like walk in the Spirit. What does it mean to walk? It was a Thursday night class. Walking in the Spirit, what does that mean? Walk by the Spirit. Yeah, that's one where you really need to spend your time focusing on that. And how does that list start? The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But it starts with love, doesn't it? And I'm not saying he did it on purpose, but it's just interesting that that characteristic of love is the first thing that he mentions. So, Melissa made the comment, and I didn't share it with the live streaming group, that soldiers will sometimes sacrifice themselves for their comrade, throw themselves on a bomb or take a bullet or whatever, but will they sacrifice themselves for an enemy? That's the kind of sacrifice that God showed. So it's a really good analogy. In fact, I'll share this story and then we'll close it out. When we went to Arizona, we went to a air museum, not a real big one, but at a World War II air museum. Just wonderful to see some of those planes. And then as you finish and you go through a hallway, there was these pictures on the hallway. And there was I think it was a B-25 or something, and it shows them flying the plane, and the plane is shot up. I'm looking at the amount of damage to that plane, and I'm surprised that it can stay in the air. And the picture is signed by a German pilot who was a fighter pilot. His task was to take them down, but he let them go because they were headed home. He let them go because it was like, this is too easy. Something struck him to not shoot them down. And now they have a reunion every year and they celebrate. He signed that thing. They have a reunion. It's brought them together at that level. That's a pretty impressive feat, because what would he face if Hitler found out? Yeah. That's the enemy. You kill them. Yeah, pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. So, okay, thank you for your time. We will get into 12 through 21 next week. Thank you.